Hi, I'm Jovian Parry. I'm a doctoral student at York University and I study gender, meat, and animality in popular culture.
Just to start off, what is going on with this whole resurgence of meat pride and the glamorization of butchers?
I think that it's partly a backlash against the rising cultural acceptability of vegetarianism and veganism.
Why is the male identity so limited today and one of probably four major aspects of that identity is meat eating?
I think that meat eating is associated with power, virility, strength. The notion that you are what you eat has been pretty consistent historically and across a lot of cultures. And so eat muscle to gain muscle, and of course muscularity is considered important to being a man, to what it means to be a man.
How do you define masculinity or manhood?
What it means to be a man differs from culture to culture and person to person, and historically it's changed. In Western patriarchal heterocentric society is, straight white men.
Right. And that definition, how do you see that being translated into pop culture?
You see it everywhere. A couple of cooking shows from the UK, Gordon Ramsay's The F Word, and even a lot of Jamie Oliver's shows are very overtly concerned with sort of the masculine persona of their main protagonist.
Why is that power so appealing, and how are men being told that they too can achieve it?
It's aligning yourself with a dominant cultural norm, so that you can have what they have. You can be one of the haves and not one of the have-nots.
How are men being told how to participate and access these sorts of power, and how is it marketed?
Well, a lot of it has to do with meat consumption, as you know, and it's marketed through cooking shows, magazines, the media. Just we kind of seem saturated with images of meat and men and the supposedly inextricable biological need for meat.
Men who identify as mainstream males, do you think that they're fearful or scared?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety behind all this, and it's palpable how anxious these men like Gordon Ramsay and Jamie Oliver are to demonstrate their masculine credentials through renouncing sentimental concern for animals or vegetarianism and stuff like that.
What is it about compassion and emotion and sentimentality that is so offensive or scary to mainstream men?
The concept of sentimentality has long sort of been ridiculed and trivialized as feminine.
Can you verbally illustrate sort of the stereotypical mainstream man?
Straight, reasoned, successful, able-bodied, muscular, not prone to mood swings or emotional outbursts, really quite unemotional all round.
What do you think is more of an ideal definition of masculinity or manhood?
Compassionate, responsible, willing to take responsibility, still reasoned and still thinking, but not afraid of emotionality or expressing emotions, and vegan.
When a male authority figure says, "Be a man," what does that mean?
Usually means toughen up, harden up, don't be a wimp, don't be a pussy, stop expressing your emotions in this way, you're making me uncomfortable.
Let's say, a typical guy comes across some information that challenges his identity, and that information happens to be some media of undercover investigative footage in a slaughterhouse. And now, this mainstream man who's been told, to have no emotion, has responded emotionally, and now he's confused. What happens in that process? Could you describe your input as to this conflict of identity that happens?
A theorist called David Plummer has this notion of a hegemonemesis. Basically, he's talking about how masculinity is defined in relation to a set of others, racial, class, gendered, and frequently animal others, in an effort to distance oneself from all these others, it can swing the other way, kind of like the ideals of hegemonic masculinity become emphasized even more, and it becomes even more important to renounce sentimentality and emotion. So I think that emotional conflict that can arise can trigger a bit of an identity crisis that can lead one to swing over into like becoming a swaggering caricature of hegemonic masculinity, such as Gordon Ramsay.
Give me like a more like a layperson scenario. Like Joe Schmo gets a PETA video sent to him in his email, and he watches it and reacts defensively. Like why does that happen?
It could freak this heterosexual guy out that he's experiencing these feelings in this supposedly feminine way, and so the reaction is to sort of push all that aside and to laugh it off and to defend meat consumption and factory farming even more staunchly.
There are some pretty interesting stereotypes of guys that care about animals or other people or ecosystems, and often the reaction by mainstream men is to accuse somebody who cares of being homosexual. Why are those two things always sort of put together?
Homosexuality has often been understood as feminization, and homosexual men as somehow feminized. Then I think that's why the charge of homosexuality gets leveled against people who care about animals and the environment and other people in a way that real men aren't supposed to. And so if you're not a real man, then you're somehow womanish, and if a womanish man is de facto a homosexual.
Getting back to this idea of the re-glamorization of butchers and sort of this idealization of butchers almost from a nostalgic place. Yeah. Why is it so important for these butchers to be seen as, it's almost like glamour shots where they're posing with a hunk of meat on their leg, with a knife, they have the weapon, they have the kill, and it's a beautiful image. Why is it important for them to be perceived that way?
It's a nostalgic revalorization of past ideals, and in eating animals, there's this idea that supposedly connects man to nature. So in that sense, butchers are kind of positioned as this intermediary between nature and humanity.
What role have cooking shows played in all of this?
Chefs have become celebrities, and they can wield enormous cultural influence over the general dispositions towards food that public has. Now it's not just about cooking, it's a whole lifestyle thing. It's not just Julia Child, preparing food on a bench. It's telling people not just how to eat, but also how to live.
Do you see a correlation between the crueler the food, the more desirable it is for certain types of people to consume it?
I think in some circles and at some times there is a definite correlation between how cruel the food is and how desirable it is. There's that old example of that French delicacy, orleton, that bird that's been drowned in cognac and then roasted alive. The eater would eat it under a towel or under a blanket to hide their shame from God. So it's about sin, right? But it's about kind of acceptable sin. It's about indulging in something that's naughty and sinful, but at the same time that makes it all the better. It's all about pleasure and fulfilling desires, gastronomic desires, and not caring so much how those desires are fulfilled.
What flaw do you see in that logic where, I kill it, therefore it's okay. I'm okay with it, therefore it's okay?
It completely fails to take into account that you are not the only person involved in this decision. You are not the only person that this affects.
Right.
The human that this affects, but, someone else suffers the consequences of these actions.
What is so significant to men? Why do they feel so tied to this identity of the hunter? Why does that still persist, even though it's so obvious that most people don't live that way anymore?
I think it's to do with alienation and urbanization and this feeling of being disconnected from nature and living in cities, and there's this desire to reconnect to, reconnect to nature, but to do so in a way that isn't like a hippy-dippy caring about nature kind of way, not in a feminine way, but in a masculine way, which is all about, killing, basically. I think that's why the man, the hunter ideal persists. It aligns very neatly with a lot of the concepts of masculinity that are held in such high regard, like autonomy and, carefully targeted brutality and strength and virility and skill, courage. Because, we live in a patriarchy, the ideals of masculinity are held to be, above those of supposed femininity. So I think that is why these man the hunter narratives persist, even now when we know that it's a lot more complicated than that.